You're listening to the Third Degree Podcast. And now, here are your hosts, Mandy Petrie and Brian J. Hatcher.
Greeting, friends, and welcome to episode 4 of the Third Degree Podcast. I'm Brian Hatcher, and with me, Mandy Petrie.
Hi, Brian.
So, this is going to be a very personal episode, certainly.
Yeah.
For those out there who listen to us regularly, thank you, first of all. But I'm sure you've noticed that we've not posted anything for a little while, either on this podcast or the Geek Watch podcast, because some things have been happening. And Mandy, you decided you did want to talk about some of that today.
Yes.
Your mother passed away.
Yes.
And of course, you've been dealing with that. And we talked about this a little bit before. This has been, for me, a weird few months because, of course, you know, what you've been going through. And a good friend of mine.
Right. You've lost some dear friends as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. A good friend of mine, his mother passed away like literally 2 days after yours did. And I had, like the end of April, of course, went to a funeral of a friend of mine that was a friend for 15 years and was like 10 years younger than I. And she passed away suddenly. And literally last night, one of my coworkers, somebody that I started my job with, he was like, started like maybe 2 years after I joined the company. Yeah, he passed away suddenly. And a friend of mine who was a publishing friend who published me several times in a magazine of his, he passed away about a month ago. And it's like yesterday was his birthday. And so that's been, like I said, it has certainly been something that's been front of mind. And again, this is a subject that I'm entering with some trepidation, if for no other reason. You know, of course, I want to be sensitive about what you're going through right now. And I know it's at this point, it's something you're still dealing with, and it's going to be something you're going to be dealing with for a while. And But, you know, you said this was something that you felt like you wanted to talk about, and we'll see how things go.
Yeah, but, you know, with all the things that we're going to cover on the Third Degree Podcast, grief is definitely something that it affects everyone in their lives, and it is so similar in the way that it affects everyone, and everyone reacts to it differently, and yet it's so relatable. You know, whoever you lose in your life, and excuse me, I mean, I knew this. We had talked about this. We knew this was going to happen, and when my mother went into the hospital, and they had found a lesion on her pancreas, and a few years ago, her sister passed away from pancreatic cancer. So it was that day that I began my grieving, because I thought that was the end. It turns out that wasn't what took her from us. My mother had an autoimmune disorder called myasthenia gravis, which prevented her from fighting off certain infections, and it was ultimately a meningitis infection that took her life. But she had gone through many different treatments, and she did end up in a hospice and surrounded by family. And her loved ones, and she had 4 daughters, and we were all there.
Yeah.
But she did live a beautiful life, and that's something that I think most people like to take with them when it comes to a loss, thinking about all the good they did, and it's our memories that keep them alive. Despite whatever your thoughts on an afterlife or the next step or translation in the Matrix or whatever the next step is, it's our memories, and what we decide is important. I guess the most important part of her transition, but that's something you've been through yourself in losing loved ones. Is there anything that you've noticed, like maybe even, I know that they've put it into like stages of grief now.
Yeah.
Is there anything you've noticed, patterns or similarities, or anything takeaway that you've seen with passing or experiences or?
On a philosophical side, of course, philosophy covers all kinds of different things, and certainly the concept of death is one of them. And right behind me, there's a quote by Marcus Aurelius about how death isn't something to fear, having never lived is what you should fear. One thing I have noticed about philosophy is that it almost exclusively covers this idea of dealing with our own death, but it very seldom ever talks about dealing with the grief of losing someone. And when you get to a certain age, this becomes more front of mind, shall we say, because you don't deal with that a lot in your 20s unless something really tragic happens, which is always a shame. I mean, my uncle passed away when I was still in high school, and it was a very sudden thing. And so it was a shock, certainly. And certainly to someone of my age, it was not something that I was expecting and something I learned to deal with. But as you get older, as you start getting to be my age, this is something that becomes a regular occurrence. And I'm sure as you get older, it becomes more and more front of mind, not because you're worried about your own death, but because you lose people around you more frequently. And where I am right now, I'm very fortunate in that I have both my parents, which I'm much older than you are. Einstein said that God doesn't throw dice, but there's no logical reason why I still have my mom and you don't, except that's just the way things happen, right? For right now. 5 years from now, there's no telling what my situation is going to be. My mom grew up with 6 brothers and sisters, and she's the only one of them left. Her parents are gone. All of her siblings are gone. And she is the last one left. And I mean, she's lost nieces and nephews at this point. And so it is a part of that journey, is dealing with this idea that people who are around you, for whatever reason, are not going to be around you forever. There's a handful of friends that I had in the 90s that have all passed away. I mean, my high school crush passed away years ago.
Yeah.
And of course, as gothy as I am, it's always assumed that, well, goths, they have no problem with this stuff because they think about it all the time. Well, first of all, we don't think about it all the time, but also it still hurts.
Yeah.
Because again, contemplating death, the memento mori, it's not about thinking about losing people around you. It's about your own death. And that's the irony of it all, is that in all the ways that death can affect us, the one that gives us the least problem is dealing with our own death. Our own death is a hell of a lot more palatable than losing somebody that we care about. And it's always going to be that way. And it ties you up in knots because you know that the person that you lost, if they had their druthers, I can tell you, when I die, what would I prefer to have? Okay, I understand people being upset at my funeral. I would love for them to be able, after I'm laid into the ground, for them to go off and forget about me and live their lives and not mourn me. I would want that more than anything, because I wouldn't want people to hold on to that hurt. But at the same time, on the other side of it, as much as you know that somebody who cares about you very much wouldn't want you to mourn them, you'd feel guilty if you didn't. And as much as it hurts, you don't want it to really stop hurting, because there's that part inside of you that goes, if I can walk away and be okay, what does that say about me and how I felt about them? It's not fair to do that to yourself, but we all do. And the truth is, however you deal with grief, that is your choice to make. And, however long it takes is how long it takes. Queen Victoria, she chose to mourn the loss of her husband for the rest of her life. And you can't say that she should have moved on or whatever. You can't tell anybody how long it takes for you to grieve, or how long you should grieve, or how you should feel about it. It's a process that you're going to go through. And you never really get to a place, obviously, where it's ever going to completely go away. The day is not going to come when you're going to stop missing them, especially if they meant anything to you at all.
Yeah, and two people that up until this week, I've only gone to work and come home, and I haven't spent any time with any of my friends until this week. And two people who have also lost their parents have both told me the story about the ball. And you have a box, and you have a ball inside this ball of grief,
Yeah.
and that's your grief. And as you live your life, your box gets bigger, and the ball is always there. And the ball will roll around and knock into the box every now and then, but it'll always be there.
Yeah.
But it'll get easier because the box will get bigger. But it will knock into the sides of your box.
Yeah.
And so they've both been through grief counseling, which I haven't been through yet. But I have a doctor's appointment coming up, so that's when I will discuss that with my doctor.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely say that at the very least, you are definitely talking to people about it. One of the problems with us guys is that we tend to swallow that stuff, and we're told to suck it up and be a guy. This idea of feeling your feelings is basically beaten out of most guys, in some cases literally. And so this idea of being in your grief and dealing with all of that it's difficult. Probably one of the most painful things I've ever seen on television. There was an episode of Modern Family. I don't know if you ever watched that.
I know of it.
Yeah, Edo. I wasn't like a regular watcher of the show. I would always see clips of it online. And Ed O'Neill, who you may remember from
Yes.
yeah, from Married with Children, he
Right.
was one of the characters. He was a father figure. A lot of the characters were sons and daughters of his, and so that there's a lot of comedy in a lot of this. But there's this one scene where he's talking about his relationship with his father and how difficult that it was, about how his father taught him about not dealing with your feelings when he was playing football in high school and broke a shoulder. And his father in the stands, was rooting for him to get back on the field. And he talks about how he played 2 downs before he passed out, and they had to carry him off the field. And it's like, he took a girl to prom and she went off with some other guy, and he tells her, eat the sandwich and forget about her. And he ends that talking about when his father died and how he didn't even cry at his father's funeral. And people just looked at him like he didn't love his dad. And there's that moment where he says, but he knew. He had to have known. And nothing to me illustrated this thing of toxic masculinity like that moment did. The moment where he didn't even grieve his father's own death because he knew in his heart, or at least he believed, that his father would have been ashamed of him if he'd have shed one tear at his father's funeral. Is at that moment you realize just how broken that character was and how much of the weight of that he carried by himself. This idea that there is a proper way to deal with grief. I think, like I said before, there's nothing philosophical that analyzes that or says, well, this is how you should grieve somebody that you've lost. And I think the reason why you don't see a lot of that in philosophy is because there isn't a one-size-fits-all recipe for grief. You can understand it. You can understand the steps of grief.
Yes,
Of the denial, the bargaining,
anger,
Yeah, and
depression,
then
acceptance.
Yeah. You can understand those steps. But however long it takes you to get through all of them. And of course, with those steps, sometimes you'll go back. Just because you reach a point of acceptance, there'll be those moments where you go back and, you're still angry about it. There's all those emotions that you're going to be feeling and feeling for a long time. So there's no textbook on how you're supposed to do it. There's no way to say this is how you should deal with it. It's all about, you deal with it in your own time, and however you choose to deal with it, that's the way that it is. And with you, my position has always been whatever you need, I'm here. And obviously, however long it takes for you to get to a place where you feel better, wherever normality is for you or whatever that new normal is, I support that. And I wouldn't have had a problem if we didn't podcast for a year if it had been a year, if it took you a year before you felt comfortable coming around or even if
We'll
you,
get a substitute happy person in the seat at the microphone.
well, I could always get somebody to sit in your chair, but I couldn't find somebody to take your place. And I think, again, that is what grief is about. And, maybe quoting Marvel television is maybe a little bit silly, but the Vision told Wanda, what is grief but love persisting? And in a real sense, until you're in the middle of it, maybe you don't fully understand that. Certainly, we've both experienced it, and we'll experience it again, certainly. There very likely will come a time where we may be sitting in these chairs and we're going to be talking about my mom when she passes. And I don't know when that's going to be, but it'll be something that we may be revisiting, whether it's on a podcast or just, having a good friend like you are who will know better than anybody what I will be going through. And will be a good friend to me to be able to help me through it. I hope that as you're going through all of this right now, whatever I can do, obviously, I just want to be the best friend to you that I can be. And whatever that is to you, I just want to be that. Whatever your grief process from this point going forward, that's completely up to you. And all I can do is support you in that and help you out. There's no quick and easy way of dealing with it. This is one of those situations that you have to come up with your bespoke coping, and whatever that looks like, that's what it is. And it's always good to have friends who have gone through the same thing. I mean, our mutual friend Kevin Pauly lost his father suddenly.
Yeah.
And so he definitely knows what that feels like. And two of you guys have talked, and he certainly has a perspective on this that some of us, like me, wouldn't have. But at the end of the day, you have to feel what you have to feel about it. And there isn't a right or wrong way to do this. You and your father and your sisters and your family, you have each other. And hopefully that's of some help. But it's not easy. And there's not a pithy bumper sticker saying that's going to make everything just all right. And again, I don't know if that would even be a good idea if there was, because obviously what your mom meant to you is much bigger than that. And it's always going to be, and it should be. Your family is supporting you, you're supporting your family, and ultimately that's all that you really can do. And I do hope that, maybe sitting down and talking about this, it feels kind of weird even, it's like we talked about, you said that you wanted to talk about grief today, and I was a little trepidatious about it because, of course, I wanted to make sure that this was something that you wanted to do, and if it was something you wanted to do, I wanted to support that. Although, again, I was like, I didn't want to make things worse on you as well. I know that you are a very giving person, and sometimes you do put other people in front of you. But for me, like I said, if even for a little bit this helped you out at all, then it was definitely worth it for me.
I hope so, and I hope maybe it would help our listeners in some way. And
Yeah.
I knew I would just sit down and cry. I've cried every day. I cried at the Ren Fair. I cried at D&D. I cried at improv. I've cried everywhere. So
Yeah, well, it's understandable. But how would you like to close things out then? Is there anything else that you...
No, I guess just stay tuned for our next third degree. We'll see 3 degrees.
Yeah, we will see you later. Well, Take care, everyone, and until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Third Degree Podcast. Please remember, the opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the views of any affiliated organizations. The content provided is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Any advice shared during the show should not be considered medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional for medical concerns or before making any health-related decisions. The Third Degree Podcast is a Hanging J production.